job. We discussed yesterday multi-jobs, parallel job execution, job dependencies. Also, we discussed the users runs and working directory syntax and shell configurations. Also, we discussed, and also we also discussed the timeouts, error handling, how to pass a job in case if it is fail for for executing the others for running like without having dependencies on the other job. If some jobs fails, we try like I showed how the error handling happens using continue on error parameter. You set that true, even the job fails, it marks as success, but in the job logs, it will be shown as fail. Just to not to affect the other jobs, we use error handling. So in today's class, we're going to discuss about security and access management. So these are like powerful concepts in GitHub Actions, and like these should be known everyone. How do you handle your secrets? How do you handle the environment variables? And also how do you give permissions to your workflows? Generally, so when you run a GitHub Action workflow, so the workflow should talk to the uh, GitHub repository, right? For example, so you have a GitHub Action workflow, and you run this workflow where you run this workflow on the runner, right? So you define a template here, and this workflow you run on a runner. So by default, the runner don't have access to the GitHub repository. So ultimately, GitHub repo is our source of truth, where we keep all the source code, all the configurations related to the source code, dependencies for running our applications, or also you define your workflows here. So the runner will not have default access to all this content. So you need to set some permissions at the workflow level in order to able to run, access the runner to this, all this content, not this content. So in GitHub repo, we also have pull request. We also have issues. So in order to access all of this content, the runner should have permissions. So what that means is, if you go to the GitHub, so this is the GitHub. So what I was talking about is the runners tab is here, where you run the workflows here. And you also have like issues, pull request, projects, right? So in order for the runner to access all of this content along with the source code, so you have to set some permissions at the workflow level. Anyway, I'll show that during the discussion. But so this is like a concept that we're gonna cover today. So we're gonna go deep dive into environment, variables, and management. Also, we will discuss about secret management best practices. And then we're going to discuss permissions in workflows. And also, I'll show you access control at workflow and job levels. So these are the topics that we're going to discuss along with the practical demos, which I'll try to map the scenarios to the real world, considering the situation like in case if you have multiple environments, how do you manage the configurations specific to each environment? And also generally in real time, uh, we deploy the changes to the dev without any approvals. But if you promote or if you go for the higher environments like stage, pre-prod and prod, we should have approvals that we need to set as a DevOps engineer. Someone from the development team and someone like from the release manager, two approvals you have to set if you are deploying to the production. So this task should be responsible by the DevOps engineer to set who can approve. And always remember, whoever is approving the releases, they are the one should be responsible. If anything breaks in the production, whoever approves, of course, they will come to the developers at the end of the day to fix the issues. But generally, from the management perspective, they will consider like whoever is responsible for the PR, he should be the one should have the explanation why something break in production and like why did you approve without reviewing end to end. And also not just the production deployments, even for the PR reviews, if you implement any changes and you send your PR to the dev lead, not the dev lead, to the release, I mean, your DevOps lead or DevOps product manager. So if he like mistakenly approves something, if that breaks our pipe, I mean, and if that breaks the CI/CD pipeline, he should be the responsibility. Anyway, we try to fix the CI/CD pipeline, but that is how the process in the projects goes. So yeah, without any delay, let's start with environments. Environment variables. So environment variables, like as the names suggest, where we basically uh, store the variables uh, in the workflow in order to consume those variables at the different steps of your CI/CD pipeline or the workflow files. So environment variables main use case is the main use case for the environment variables is to store configuration values separately from code. And you maintain other advantage of environment variables is you maintain different configurations for different environments. So suppose you have environment variables like dev, stage, pre-prod, and prod. Each of these environment variables will have different configurations. So keeping them all in one environment configuration doesn't make sense, right? Because all of these environments will have a different configurations, different values. So we need to maintain specific to the environment variables. Uh, so there is other thing called in the environment variables, like where do you define these environments? So you can define the variables, environment variables at the workflow level, which means that you can define the environment variables at the root of the workflow. You can also define the workflow, I mean, environment variables at the job level. Like if you define the environment variables at the job level, you can access these environment variables across the steps. And you can also define the environment variables at the step level. So which is specific to the step. So if you define at the step level, you can only access the environment variables at the step level only. No other steps, no other jobs will be able to access these environment variables. But if you define the environment variable at the job level, so all the sequence steps, all the relevant steps you define under this job, they can able to access the environment variables. You can also define the environment variables at the workflow level, which is the root, where the jobs and the steps can able to access the environment variables. So this is the hierarchy that we have in the GitHub Actions. So let's jump on to the demo. So this is like my code, which can you guys see my Visual Studio? Can someone confirm?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Okay. So this is a
You can zoom in, Surya, a little bit.
yeah, sure. So this is the workflow that I have, where the workflow starts with the name, environment variables, and the trigger types that I have is on push to the main, and also I have another trigger that was part of this section under on is workflow dispatch to manually run the workflow. And here comes. So I have defined the environment variable at the job level. I have two environment variables. One is the node environment production and the API timeout to set to 30. So this is defined at the job level. So I mean workflow level. When you define at the workflow level, all like the jobs and the steps will be able to access these environment variables. And if you scroll down, you have a job section. You have a job name called environment-demo, where this job runs on runner Ubuntu latest. And it also has an environment called production, which is defined at the job level. But like so this is not like if you observe, right, environment is the key, production is the value. Technically this is not like a key value page. If you see, if you in the workflow level you define an environment, under the environment you define the key value page, but here at the job levels you just created the environment and the environment name, but you have to create this environment on the GitHub. So where do you create? So you have to go to the GitHub and have to go to GitHub, go to settings, and you have to go to environment section. So this is a place where you differentiate environments between, I mean, different environments. So now I'll come here and I'll create an environment called production, and then I'll click on configure. And if you scroll down, you will see sections like environment variables. So these environment variables is specific to the environment that you are going to create. For example, this environment variable is like access key, and then you given some values, and then you added that variable. And if you go to the click on environments, if you see, right, you have a environment called production. So similarly, you can have a environment called stage, and you click on create configure environment. And if you scroll down, and you can add the environments like access key, and this access key is specific to the stage environment and not the production environment. So scenarios like these to differentiate or to split the configurations between the environments. You create here, you add the environment variables here, and during the workflow execution, you simply call this using this environment parameter and the environment name. So what does that means is you can try to access these environment variables, whatever you created in GitHub. You can try to access those in our steps section. That is how the whole idea of differentiating the environment variables. And right now you can see if you scroll down at the bottom, you also have an environment variable at the step level, and this environment variable is specific to the step, and no other steps will be able to access these environment variables. So once you define the environment variables, the way you access the environment variables using dollar and the environment variable. So that way you can able to fetch this value.
Surya,
And
we can
similarly,
only see GitHub. We can't see the.
sorry. So if you scroll down, if you see the last step, so you have a step called where you define the environment variable at the step level, where you have a key and the value. So the key is step var and the value is step value. So the way you access the environment variables in the GitHub workflow is using dollar and the environment variables. And if you try to access this using dollar, then you can able to fetch the value during the workflow execution. And similarly, if you have any variables, environment variables that you define at the job level, so the way you access is using the dollar. So if you right now, if you see inside this steps section, you have an environment variable called uh, node env that you are trying to fetch at the step level using dollar node environment, and you're also trying to fetch the environment variable using API timeout. So let's run this workflow and see how it is behaving. And then we will toggle around it by defining the environment variables at the job level, step level, and then GitHub UI environment level. So let's name it as the repo name as environment, and then let's keep it as a private, and then add a readme file, then create a repository, and then create a folder. As you guys should be known now, all the workflows you should keep under slash dot github slash workflows. Then naming it as the workflow as workflow.yml. You can give the name whatever name you want to give. So my intent now is, so I have defined the environment variables at the workflow level. So I'll try to print the values at the step level. The first use case that I'm doing is now this. So let's commit this. So this workflow will not trigger. I mean, it will trigger because you have push, like you have the trigger as on push. So let's go to the actions. Let's go to the workflow, and let's go inside this workflow steps and see what values it's printed. So it's like, if you see, you have it is printed the value production. It also printed the API timeout, but it is not like it didn't print the custom variables. What does mean? That means if you go to the workflow, you see you have, like, you are trying to call the dollar custom variable, but this environment variable is not defined at the workflow level, and it is not even defined at the job level. So let's try to define it at the workflow level, which means at the top of the workflow. And if you also see, you are able to print the environment variable at the step level. You are able to print the value step. And one more thing you need to remember, if you see at the step level, each of these steps, you can see the environment variables in the logs. So GitHub will automatically show this section at the logs where it will print all the environment variables like that we are like consumed. But whenever you are trying to access the secrets, which I'm going to show you next set, I mean the next few minutes. So the secrets, whenever try to access it, it will show star star star. It will not. It will be. It basically encrypt the secrets. But environment variables, it will show. So the custom variable, like, it is not defined at the workflow level. So let's define that at the workflow level. So whatever the demo I'm trying to show now is trying to show you the environment variables and trying to access the environment variables at the workflow level. So this is the variable. So let's define this variable at the workflow level. So let's name it this custom variable called, you can maybe set it as dev, and then now commit the changes. And if you go to the actions, you see the workflow. So now if you see, try to see the environment variables. Now see the custom variable dev is able to print it. And if you see the more logs here, you have the environment variable called custom variable dev. This variable comes from the, all of these variables comes from the workflow level. So let's do one thing. Let's do one thing. So let's create a environment variable called production on the GitHub. So how do you create environments on the UI? Go to settings, go to environment section. And I also have, I mean, already have a environment called production. So let's add a variable called, let's name it this as version. Let's name it as API conversion, then add the variable. So, and also one more thing, whenever you try to create an environment, so the environment variable uh, should not be created with hyphen. You can, like, it is allowed only characters like underscore. So now by default, if you see, even though I have given in the small cases, environment variables are like case sensitive. You have to define in the caps. Even if you don't define in the caps, GitHub will automatically convert that to the caps. So right now I have the environment variable API version with the key. The key is the API version and the value is 12. So now this environment I've created in the production. So the way you try to access this environment is you have to define the environment first at the job level, the way I have defined now. Once you define the environment variable at the job level, then you have to define a step, something like this. So I have defined like this. I'm trying to access the environment variable. So I'm going to GitHub and just add this line, the workflow. Go to actions, go to workflow, go to workflow file, and then add this one and see whether you are able to print or not. So let's check properly the syntax. For now, comment these environment variables. We don't want because we already shown this. So environment variable, then you're trying to access the API version that comes from the production environment. And let's comment this. Let's commit this. Go to actions and try to see whether you're able to access it. So you see, right? We are like not able to fetch the environment variable. The reason being is for environment variables that you define at the UI level, so the way you access the environment variable is via vars. So you have to define the variable. Instead of directly calling the variables, you have to call this using dollar curly braces vars dot your environment variable. So this is the way you try to access the variables that you define uh, at the environment level. So the syntax is dollar curly braces and the vars dot API version. Now let's try to access this. Let's try to run this. See now if you see, so you're able to print this environment variable, and you also see, right, there are a couple of environment variables which we are not using here, but we are able to fetch the value specific to the production environment and able to print this. There is also environment variable called that you define at the step level. So anyway, we already ran that. So let's open that. So this environment variable you define at the step level. So the way you access the environment variables defined at the step level is using dollar. And this also, like if you try to access the environment variable at the workflow level, the syntax is same. The only change in the syntax is when you try to access the environment variable from the environment variables parameter, where there is a use case if you're having to separate the environments between few different environments. So you define each environment and you place all the configuration inside this environment, like variables. And there is also a section called secrets, where you try to place the secrets like access key, secret key, any API token, any database configurations, database username, database password. So you try to, because each of the environment will have a different databases, right? So in order to place those databases, you place those in the environment, and under the environment you try to, because database credentials are case like very sensitive information, you try to place it in the environment secrets, not environment variables. So this is the like the best practice that you need to follow. So in GitHub Actions, all the sensitive information you place it in the either at the repository level secrets. So there are two places where you can store the secrets. So if you see, this is the like secret section, which is at the repository level. So there is also a section called secrets inside the environment, just like I showed, where you securely store your secrets specific to the environment. So there is also one more secret store you can set at the org level. So in GitHub Actions, these are the three levels where you place. If you go to the org level, any of the organization, like, let's go to the Maze Factory organization. And if you go to the settings, and if you go to secrets and variables, you can also store the secrets at the org level. If you see, you have an environment secrets. So the difference is, if you define the secrets at the org level, all the repositories inside this organization will be, sorry, I have shown in the repo. Why I am not showing, like, I don't see, I'm not able to see the organization settings, but some strange reason, but eventually you'll have a settings in the organization level where you also define the secrets there. So if you define the secrets at the organization level, so anyone, like whoever created repositories, what are all the repositories that you have, will be able to fetch that secrets from the organization secrets. If you define the secrets at the repo level, so these secrets is specific to the at the repository level only. Outside people cannot access these secrets. But if you define at the org level, so the secrets can be accessed like whoever part of this organization, whatever repository that you have in the organization can able to access these secrets. That's the difference. So let's move on to the next section, secret management. So right now, till now, we discussed about the environment variables, like the different levels that you define our environment variables and the way you access the environment variables. So all those we have discussed. So now the important topic is the secret management. And this is one of the important topic that even interviews will ask. How do you securely store your secrets? So GitHub Actions will have a feature inbuilt that is supported called secrets section. So in the secret section, just now I discussed, you can create the secrets at the repo level. You can create the secrets at the org level. And you can also create the secrets at the environment level, which I showed in the UI few minutes back. So generally, when you talk about secrets, those are like secure information. Those are like sensitive data, which no one should be able to access those secrets. And even if someone try to access the secrets, we need to encrypt the secrets. So GitHub Actions will have the inbuilt feature. Whenever you create a secrets with the value, basically at the back end, what happens, it will encode the secret. But when you try to access during your workflow execution, you can able to access the secret without any issues. But even in the workflow logs, the secret will be hidden. You won't be able to see that secrets. And other best practice of when you are dealing with the secrets, you should have a rotation of the secrets every at least 30 days. For example, you have created a secret called database password that you have set it at the organization level. So the best practice to manage the secrets and the best practice to not leak the secrets, you should rotate the secrets every 30 days. And it also you have to make like audit trails You have to review how many secrets you have created at the org level in GitHub and try to get the data, and then if the rotation is required, you have to rotate the secret. Other thing is you also should be aware when you actually, I think if some of you already working as a DevOps engineer, they should be aware of this thing called never ever hard code secrets in code or workflows. Even you should never save your secrets on your notepad, sticky notes. That is not a best practice. But when you are dealing with the multiple files, when you are creating automations, if you have a secret value, there are some situations where we are forced to do, like if we want to do some testing immediately and want to show that results to the manager, and if someone from your team is pressuring to do the test as soon as possible, if the other guy, he's not aware of the seriousness of the secrets, he recommended to hardcode the secrets in the source code or in the workflow YML files. So based on the situation, we tend to hardcode the secrets in the YML and test the workflows because of the situation. But my recommendation is, even if someone forces you to hardcode a secret, or if someone's, even if it is a manager or lead, whoever it is, never hardcode the secrets on the workflow YMLs, because you are the one responsibilities. Because when you make a commit with the secret hardcoded in the source code, then you are the one responsible for that. So no one, even the lead manager, whoever asks you to do the hard coding and secrets and test as soon as possible, they will never come and help you. You are the one responsible. In some cases, I have seen people leaking the secrets. They are like, they have terminated, like the management terminated them, because clients are more concerned about handling the secrets. And you also, when you are dealing with the secrets, you always should have uh, different secrets for different environments. Always you have to keep in mind that you have to maintain different secrets for different environments. So yeah, so when it comes to the fetching the secrets, so now you have created a secret at the repository level or the organization level. So the way you access the secrets is syntax. This syntax, dollar, curly braces, then secret start, secret name. Similarly, how you access the variables when you define it, the environment in the GitHub, you call it as using var section, right? Similarly, when you try to access the secrets in our workflow, you try to access that using secrets.github, secrets.secret. Let's go to so let's open the Visual Studio, and then this is the workflow I have, where the workflow name is secret management. The trigger type is workflow dispatch. And then the job section, I have secrets. And the runs on is the runner name. And then I also have an environment called production. And inside the steps section, I have a couple of steps defined. For example, I'm trying to access the repository secrets. The way I'm accessing using secrets dot API key. This is the syntax. Let's check whether this is created or not in the UI. Then let's go to GitHub. So let's go to settings. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm creating the secret at the repository level. So this is the secret place. Scroll down, you can see the section called repository secret. Click on the new repository secret and give the secret name, and then give a dummy value, and then add the secret. So now go to the workflow, and then inside the workflow, let's try to edit this. So one more thing is, so just for the sake of the demo, I'm trying to echo the secret. Even if you try to echo the secret, it will not print, but you should not echo the secret in the real time. So let's commit this. So if you commit now, it will not trigger because the trigger section is workflow dispatch. So I have to go to the workflow name and then try to run the workflow from here. Click on run workflow. Go to actions. Now it's the workflow is triggered. We started executing it. And if you try to see this workflow, you see by default GitHub is encrypted. It is giving us the star. So now what we can do now is let's delete this secret that we created at the repository level. Let's delete this. It is asking for the authentication. Let's give the value. So I have deleted the secrets. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create the secret at the environment level. So similarly, how we created the environment variables, I'm also creating a secret. Called API key and the dummy values some value. Then click on add secret. So now I have the secret at the environment level. So right now we don't have any secrets at the repository level. So the way you try to access is there are two places you have to check when you create a secret at the environment level. So first thing is you have to define the environment parameter at the job level with the value. And then when you try to access a secret, we have to call using the syntax. And then let's run this workflow. Go to actions, go to workflow name, and then click on run workflow and click on run workflow. So the workflow is started running now, and then it is started executing. And then see, you are able to print. I mean, you are not able to print that, but from the logs, you can see that we are able to fetch the secret successfully. So the other thing I want to show you is, anyway, all these topics will be covered during, I mean, in practically in the real time. We're gonna cover this in during the project section, but you should be aware of the basics, at least the syntax and the different, uh, sections that you create this, and how do you access it. So those you should be aware. So you don't need to worry about all these concept because anyway we'll be covering at the practical demo. So for now, I have like the final important topic to discuss is the permissions in the workflow. So permissions like I was talking about where the like for the runners to access the what do you say? So obviously the runner should have access to the source code, issues, pull request, all those informations. So the only way that you define the permissions is at the workflow level permissions. So if you define the workflow level permissions, you can tell the runners that, so these are the permissions that I have. So using these permissions, you try to fetch the information that is required for you. And in GitHub Actions, we have workflow permissions like uh, you have workflow permissions like read and then write. So these are the permissions that you have at the workflow permissions. So these permissions you can define at the workflow level, which is at the root, or you can also define the permissions at the job level. So let me show that as well, what I exactly meant. So can you guys see my Visual Studio? Okay. So this is the permissions I was talking about. So now, right now, I have created a workflow level permissions where these are the permissions that are available. So we have the different parameters like content, issue, packages, pull request. So content is like the access source code. So the runner should have read access to the source code. And the other section is issues. So the runner should have a write access to the issues. The other section has packages, the GitHub, where you have defined as none, which the runner will not be able to access the package section. And the other one is pull request, where you have defined the the runner will have only the runner will can able to write something on the pull request. So the other thing that you should aware of that. So all these permissions will be handled via called GitHub token. So whenever you run any workflow in GitHub Actions, GitHub will automatically create this token. And this token will have default permissions like read to read the contents of the source code, but it will not have permissions to write the contents of the source code until you explicitly set that up the workflow level. So right now, the permission for the GitHub action token is contents read, where it only can clone the repository. It is not able to commit something. If you want to commit to the repository, you have to define the content permission like write. So during the real-time scenarios, we don't try to uh, read the content. One second, guys. Someone is knocking the door. Yeah, sorry. So we have like permissions that is uh, defined at the job level, and these are the permission sets that contents to read the source code. So the runner can only read the content. It will not write anything to the source code again, and all other permissions I can discuss. So this is at the workflow level. If you set the workflow level, all the jobs that you define on this workflow will use these permissions. And you also define the permissions at the job level, where you right now we have added the content type at the write and actions as read. So if you define two permissions, the first priority is it will take the permissions at the job level permissions. And if you have another job created here, let's say deploy job. So this job level, if you are not defining any permissions, for instance, so the permissions, the default permission that will be used by this job is that comes from the workflow level. So the default permission that comes for this job is at the workflow level. So similarly, we have like so many sections available permissions that we have in the GitHub. Let me show those as well. I'm just fetching that from the official documentation. Anyway, I'll share that later, but I can show it from. So if you see, so these are the permissions section. Let's remove all of these. Yeah. So these are the permissions, different permissions based on the use case. So the permissions that you have contents, deployments, ID token, packages, discussions. So I'll share it the official documentation page as well to go through. So you can go through the different permissions and the possible values these permissions expect. So all I can share you so that you can have a look at. So the few permissions that we discussed now right now is content, issues, packages, and the pull request. And then the different levels and uh, uh, the different ways that you define it and at the different levels. So always think from the least privilege perspective. Um, so that is a habit that as well, like the DevOps engineer should have. So you should always give the only the necessary permissions that workflow should require, and you should not grant more privileges that because that is not a security based practice. So even you should note this point because even the interviews they expect you to tell this to like how do you handle security, then you should definitely tell this point to have the permissions set at the least privileges. And also when you are defining,
Hi, Surya.
yeah,
Hello. I have one doubt. Actually, we have permissions like read, write, and none, right? Normally, we also have a read, write, execute, right? Suppose you want to perform through the scripts any actions, we will use execute through the like in Jenkins file or like that. But here none is there, right?
yes,
So execute is not there, right?
yeah,
Like how?
execute is not.
So how you will in that case if you want to run any file from the script, execute some operations, uh, how it will take care?
So you are not like it is not restricting us to provide access to a file. So the permissions files you can give it using the shell command. Okay. So the permissions is you're telling to the runners and you are setting the permissions to the runners, not the script files. That is you need to note down. And in GitHub Actions, we don't have executable permissions. Everything is read, write, and then none. So these are not specific to the files. These are you are setting to the runner. So the runner should able to clone the source code. The runner should have access to write something to the pull request issues. You are like we are dealing with the components of the GitHub from the runner perspective. Not you're not dealing with the script files. So script file permissions you can anyway give inside at the script level under step section. You can give the permissions using change mod. But So yeah, that is how it is. You're not dealing with the files permissions here.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions, guys? I think I'm not uh, going in deep, because if I go deep, then things might get confused. These anyway will be covered during uh, the project discussion with the real time. Um, so these permissions we use during real time as well. Like whenever we try to access AWS from the runner. So the general typical way we try to access to the AWS is using access key and secret key. But in our real time, I mean, in our project, we try to access this AWS accounts using OIDC role. What is OIDC role? Everything we'll discuss in that session. So OIDC role is way of authenticating to AWS using the roles. So you create a role in the AWS and then you try to access using that role. So for the runner to access that role to access the AWS account, so you need to define some permissions at the workflow called OIDC, which we will discuss that. It's called like OIDC is called ID token. So those all concepts we'll discuss that in the real-time projects when we are actually working. But for now, just understand uh, the permissions that you set it at the job and the workflow level, and the different components, the permissions that we have, like um, just like I've shown about the issues, packages, ID token, deployment contents. And also in today's session, we discussed about environment variables, secrets, all those topics. So yeah, that's it I have for today's class. If you have any, let's open up the discussion now. So please unmute yourself and start asking questions.
Now we are using GitHub provided runners. We can use self-hosted runners also. Is there anything we need to add it in the pipeline for that?
Yeah, so let me share my screen. So the first thing when you're dealing with the self-hosted runners, you have to configure the runner. You go to settings. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So go to settings, actions, runners. So you have to configure the runner first. So once you configure the runners will have a labels attached to it. So you have to pick those labels and go to actions, go to workflow, enter the workflow, go to workflow file, go inside the workflow file. So instead of Ubuntu latest, which is GitHub hosted runner, you have to define your runner label. Let's say self-hosted, for example, I'm talking again. So if you point your runner to self-hosted, and if you configure that in the settings, which I showed, so your jobs will be executed on the self-hosted runner. As simple as that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if you guys don't have anything, we can wrap it up. Uh, and happy Dasra to all of you. I will see you, like I'll see you tomorrow. Please go through the recordings and documentations, which are whatever I'm sharing. Yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sri.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank